Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are
Good,
you?
good. And you're Chief Troy Gay.
Yes, sir.
Chief, you're the Chief of Staff for the Austin, Texas Police Department. Have more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement. Um, Earlier this year, Nashville Mayor John Cooper created a police and policy commission to compose of 41 diverse Nashvillians to take a look at law enforcement here and to examine ways to improve public safety and to build trust. And you're one of the finalists for the new chief of police, for the chief of police. So, a few questions for you. First one is, what aspects of the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department would you seek to change based on the information that you have about the department, what you found out?
Well, thanks, Dwight. And first, I want to just thanks for this opportunity to be here. Nashville is a great city. Um, Change is difficult. Change is hard, but it's necessary. I have my whole career, I have been a reformer. I've been a change agent. I've been a collaborator. I think that is something that's needed to make that change. I have done some research on, I know the commission's work. I know that there are work being done by the Community Oversight Board, Gideon's Army, NOAA, which is Nashville's, I believe it's the Organized for Action and Hope. And so there's a lot of recommendations out there, but something that I would like to do, and I know that there's a lot of change that needs to occur in recruiting and training, use of force, mental health. But what I would like to do is I would like to sit down. I would like to sit down and sort of go through those reports and meet with those that actually authored those reports and talk about the necessary change. I also think it's necessary to meet with the great men and women of the Nashville Police Department to one, gain their insight and gain their trust and their buy-in, to be able to make these necessary changes today in public safety around the country. So I don't want to single Nashville out.
Okay.
Around the country, we are all trying to reimagine public safety and trying to make the changes to meet the specific needs for our communities. I think Nashville right now, if I had to say one thing that I'm going to seek to really do immediately, and that is to really garner the trust. There's been fractured relationships in Nashville with groups, with community groups, and I think my job would be to help to repair those, to work with the men and women of Nashville to do that, because I want Nashville Police Department to be respected and trusted. I want them to collaborate with the community to be able to address the needs, and those are the things that I think is necessary to bring the necessary change to build those relationships and to be collaborative.
Okay. You've talked some about your past experiences with organizational culture and strategic planning. Would you like to add anything to that? And then how would you draw on those experiences to make changes to the police department here?
Well, I think that in a department in Austin, we're very progressive. We're always looking for best practices. I don't think you need to change just to change, but I think as any department in this country is that policing has changed. 33 years ago, policing is not the same when I started, but I can tell you that it's better than it was 33 years ago. Our officers are better trained, they're better experienced, they have better equipment, and I think that everything from changing uniforms to changing cars to changing policies, I think that's almost everyday activity of a department, and as an executive of where I'm at today of leading the Austin Police Department. My experience is, I just touched on a few of just some basics, but I'd like to touch on a few. Is one, the Austin Regional Intelligence Center. In 2001, after 9/11, there were there were a lot of fusion centers throughout the country that were setting up and quickly with money coming from federal government to be able to make sure that there weren't silos of information to bring that together.
Okay.
Austin took a different approach. We took our time.
Okay.
We made sure that what we did is that we not only wanted to set up that fusion center to deter and apprehend and prevent crimes and terrorist activities, but what we did is that we knew that there were concerns from the community. We knew that it was important to collaborate. I was part of that. I helped stand up that. I had several town hall meetings with community members, and we did it in a collaborative approach. We had to take this to the council, and it was unanimous. Because of the approach and the collaborative approach that we took, it stood up. Technologies are always the big brother sometimes, from license plate readers, body worn cameras, public safety cameras. All these I had a hand as a commander and as an executive staff of really pushing our profession forward with using technologies. But with that, there's fear. There's community that has concerns. In each one of those, just like we did with the Intelligence Center, is that we sat down with the community and said, what are your concerns? We showed them our draft policies. In those draft policies, they made some great recommendations, things that we didn't have a lens for, that they provided that to us. And we made great policies. And those technologies are still there today, and they're still working, and they're being effective for what they were intended to use.
Okay.
The last piece that I really want to talk about is some recent work, although it started a couple years ago. I've been the lead sponsor, working with our equity office and working with others on our diversity and equity and inclusion, which is very important. It's important because of really looking at the institutional and the structural racism that is in our systems, and things that we need to look at. And we've made a very deliberate and intentional effort in those arenas, which I'm very proud of, which really goes to the cultural changes that need to be made in law enforcement. So like I said, I'm excited. I summed that up. I want to be collaborative. I want to be a relationship builder, which I think is going to be key to making Nashville that respected, and that department respected and trusted, and just working with the community. So I'm excited for that.
Okay. How long do you think it would take you to make some of the meaningful changes that you talk about making, that you would like to make?
Well, a lot of the things, such as the last piece that I really talked about, was the institutional and structural racism. It's going to take time, but it's going to it's not a overnight change. It's something that we need to start, and we need to recognize, and we need to move. There are a lot of recommendations from some of the things that I've reviewed from, I believe the Community Oversight Board put out 6 points on use of force and mental health, and most of those recommendations are things that we've been doing for 10, 15 years in the Austin Police Department, and I think that there are changes that we can start making faster and do within the first 60 to 90 days, but some of those are going to take a little bit more time to really work through, because any meaningful change is, you want it to be sustainable, you want it to last, and it's going to take working with the community to make those changes.
Okay. A few minutes earlier, you talked a little bit about diversity.
Yes, sir.
Metro Nashville's police department, sworn officers here, are currently 73.6% white. And when you include women, white women, takes it up to 81%. What is your thinking around diversity, equity, which you mentioned a little earlier, and inclusion? And how would you seek to increase diversity in Metro's police department?
Well, first, as I mentioned, is that we've started this work a couple years ago in our diversity, equity, and inclusion. We actually started with with working with our equity office. It's a new division within the city of Austin. They've created an equity toolkit that really allows you to look at policies and practices in your department. We've already recently did 5 of our divisions, which we have over 20 divisions in a large agency, but we really were able to do that. But community was involved with that. The reports hopefully should be coming out soon to really give us some 2 or 3 points that we can really start working towards. But for it to really take hold, it's going to take the leadership of a department to believe that that's necessary. And I've currently, our leadership team and our command structure has gone through Undoing Racism. We have done Beyond Diversity. We're trying to incorporate those aspects into our academy. We're trying to really put forth a plan. We hired a consultant here about 6 months ago to really dive into and help us with the institutional and systematic racism, and really looking at our culture, our department, our policies, and really to open our lens to things that, to be honest with you, that you don't know what you don't know. And so those are the things that I believe that as we educate ourselves, as we learn more about our history of policing, which hasn't been the best, but it's important to recognize our past so we can then start having the dialogue, educating our officers, and then building that trust with the community so we can build on that diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay. Let me ask you, how would you recruit or encourage more people of color to apply for jobs within the Nashville Police Department, and then especially as field officers?
Dwight, that's a great question, and I think it goes before recruiting. Recently, we actually met with, we have a Black Officers Association at Austin, and really talked about and had some meaningful conversations and really transparent, really talked about what are the changes. And believe it or not, recruiting came up, but before that, actually, they started talking about the backgrounds. Is that, what are the barriers? What are the barriers to getting into law enforcement? And someone, and it was highlighted in actually Driving While Black, and one of the officers brought up an example of saying, you realize that if you have a disqualifier, that if you have 3 tickets, then you're disqualified. And he brought up the issue, is he said, you know that you're more susceptible of being stopped when you're black, and do you have a barrier that you can remove, that you can get good qualified applicants? Because some of their friends, some of their people that have good character and would be great officers, is that there was just these artificial barriers. I think that what I would want to do is I would want to look at, just like we're doing in Austin, is what are those barriers? What are those barriers that are preventing people from coming in? But when you talk about recruiting, is that you got to market yourself. You got to have a department that is marketing themselves to one, that we're trying to get the right people. We're trying to get the people of service. You know, I think too often you see the videos, recruiting videos, and they represent 5% of the action packed of what the officers do. But that's really not what we're trying to recruit. We're trying to recruit for the other 95%, the officers that need to have the heart of a servant, that needs to have empathy, compassion. And so we changed our strategy on our video in Austin and really moved to that. But I think that you have to have a marketing plan. You have to, one, show the community the great work that's being done. I want to be able to market the department in Nashville that, just like last night, I watched on the news, is that an officer was recognized for saving the life of a young female. I mean, those are the stories that happen every day, over and over and over again. And unfortunately, there are bad things that happen in the policing environment, but we need to showcase. I want the mothers and the fathers of Nashville to be able to say to their children, hey, I want you to become a police officer. I want you to serve our community. I think by doing those and having those strategies, I think that we'll be able to get there.
Okay. Let me ask you this. What tools do you think are effective that would help ensure that police officers can communicate with non-English speakers?
You know,
Are there
that's
tools out there that you think are effective?
absolutely. In Austin, we have a language line. It's something that has been developed over time, but it is a service that we have to where if an officer goes to a scene and is unable to communicate, and he can contact the language line and really try to, it's like having a third person in the room, and they can use their phone via just through the audio or sometimes there's video to be able to communicate with that person so we can get that vital information. I mean, people contact the department at a time when sometimes it's the worst situation of their life. We need to be able to, one, have the ability to communicate. I mean, that's one way of doing the translation line, but we need to recruit. We need to recruit officers that speak different languages. We try to recruit people. We have people that joined the Austin Police Department from Germany. So we have people that have different languages in our department, as well as sign languages. I mean, we need to be able to communicate with our folks. To do that, there's a lot of men and women in Nashville that I guarantee you that would want to volunteer for a translation service, that would want to work side by side with officers to be called to be able to help. We have a volunteer program in Austin. I think that it's awesome is that it's through our Office of Community Liaisons that we have people that have said, I want to give back, I want to provide a service, and they can go out and do that. I mean, technology is, I mean, some of the officers or the younger officers know technology probably better than I do. They're using Google Translate. They're using different tools that wasn't available when I first started on the deal. I was actually on a call just right before COVID, and I was riding with an officer, and we could not communicate with a particular individual. And that officer quickly went to Google Translate. I mean, we were able to, he was lost. We were able to communicate with him and able to get him where he needed to go just by using a different type of technology.
Okay. Last year, the Metro Police Department used force 299 times. Of those, 181 involved black suspects. What would be your approach to the use of force as chief of police in Nashville? And then could you also talk about some of the experiences you might have had in reducing force, the use of force?
Absolutely. One is that force should never be used unless it's absolutely necessary. It needs to be objectively reasonable. It needs to be, we need to train our officers to make sure that they use de-escalation, and we train them. We give them the tools necessary to communicate. There's a lot of training out there on de-escalation, on procedural justice, on tactical communication. There's a lot of things, but my particular approach is to really ensure that our officers understand that, you know, time, distance, cover, that those things are on your side. Is that take the time necessary to talk to individuals so we don't encounter. 299 is that 10, 299, 2,000, is that we really need to reduce that. When I looked at the number of 60% were African American, we need to look at that. We need to dive and understand what that is and why that is particularly occurring. I think that training is so important. Something that we've done recently in Austin is that we really felt like that we needed scenarios. We needed to try to give our officers opportunities to de-escalate. So we've bought a system that would, it's called Vitro, which is a virtual training, which allows a view for an officer to go in and They have the same tools that they have to go on every call, but the idea is that you may not need to use that tool.
Okay,
You need to work on that de-escalation and that training. Go ahead, sir.
okay. No, have you had any experiences, I guess you've had some, have you had any direct experiences into reducing the use of force?
We have looked at our use of force in Austin, and we have done things to better train and to better define. Our force isn't as high, but I think the piece where it is that one of the things the Community Oversight Board is really looking at is the force, and I know it said 299, but I really believe that the Department of Justice, which is something that we actually did that in 2007 and really looked at our force. And we really said that we needed to update our definitions, our policies, our training, all the things when it comes to sort of the same thing with coming with levels of force. We did that back earlier in the year, in 2007, 2009. But specifically is that you have to be able to know the type of force, and you have to report it to be able to sort of dive in. I do think that we have reduced the number of encounters of higher levels of force when it escalates. So I do think that we have been successful at being able to de-escalate, to be able to use the lowest level of force possible.
Okay. When we started talking a little earlier,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned the Nashville's Community Oversight Board,
Yes, sir.
which was created by the Nashville voters 2 years ago. And it's one of the strongest community oversight boards in the country. What would be your approach as chief of police with the Community Oversight Board, the Police and Policy Commission, NOAA? You talked about relationships. Would you like to add on to what you said earlier?
Absolutely. I think it's, my relationship would be collaborative. It's relationship building. Oversight has been with the Austin Police Department since 2001, almost 20 years. It has evolved, and I have seen it evolve through the years from a sergeant in 2001 when I was there to just seeing the development of oversight, which I think is key, because I think it does need to be independent. It needs to be independent from a department. It needs to be one that is, police officers are given a lot of authority, a lot of power to take people's rights away, to put people in jail. And I think it's appropriate, and I think it's necessary to have necessary oversight for the department. I've worked in internal affairs. I've worked directly with and we've made changes in about 2018. But back then, the Office of Oversight was a little bit different. Had some different leadership, and I was a lieutenant there, and I worked with them. We had our database, they had their database, and I said, you know what? We need to have one. We need to be transparent. We need to put it all in one place and work to get that accomplished. And it's still there today. The current system that we have today is we have a little bit different. I believe it was voted in by the community here, the oversight. Ours was done through a contract between our association and the city. And I've sat on our negotiations for the city, on the city side, for the last 2 contracts. And each time the city has increased the role of our oversight. We have an monitor type role. I believe you'll have an investigative model, which I think we're moving to that direction. But it's all about relationships. It's all about collaboration. I talk daily with our executive director. In my current role of running the day-to-day operations, is that we continually work through, and I know that she'll be watching this, and she's gonna probably say, okay, don't stretch. But we don't agree with everything, but we have a good relationship. We work together. We're working on a joint SOP right now to make sure that internal affairs and the Office of Police Oversight can be on the same page, so we work collaboratively to get what we need to do to make sure that we have the proper oversight.
So, and then how do you build those relationships or build sustainable partnerships with the Black community, Latinx community? How do you do that? Same way that you would do it with those organizations such as the Community or Oversight Board? How you do that? How do you build relationships with different communities, some of which have little trust in the police department?
To be intentional, to be real, I may have a police officer uniform each and every day, but behind the badge that I wear, which I'm proud to wear, it's a human. It's somebody that cares for not only the profession that I've joined, but the service and the obligations that I have for the community. I think that as the men and women of Nashville really look at this and decide who they want, is that I think that I can build those relationships. I've done that in the past. I've done that in Austin my entire career, because you can't get anything done. You can't recruit. You can't make any of these changes if you don't have the relationships. And I believe that my values of integrity, courage, accountability, respect, and my ethical being just to make those right decisions. I think I'm the right man, and I'm excited
Okay.
to be part of this journey.
All right. One other question. What role would you develop for the police department in relation to individuals with mental illness or in mental health crisis moving forward? We have a pre-arrest diversion program that we've started, but what would, when it comes to mental health, mental illness?
Specifically on I believe we're starting to really look at it as a public health crisis, is that we really need to look at a lot of things differently. We too in Austin have had jail diversions to where we have partnered with our mental health providers, our mobile crisis teams, who have always been out there, but we've actually partnered with them to say, you know what, if we have an officer and it's a low-level nonviolent crime, can we call you and you come and take care of the needs of this particular individual? And so we've done that. We've done that as a chief over investigations over the mental health program, is we instituted our jail diversion program. And we were successful. Over 80% of all the contacts that we had is that we were able to divert that. I think that, but we keep looking, we keep trying to figure out what we can do more and more. And right now we're saying, well, we're trying to separate the officer from even having to go to that particular call. And what we're trying to do is that we've trained our 911 call takers on mental health, first aid training, trauma-informed training. We have just contracted with our mental health providers to have clinicians that are in the dispatch center. So this is something that we started last year in December, and it's not 24/7. We hope to have that by the end of the year. But what it is that they can identify people in mental health crisis, someone that they don't really need a police officer to respond to, and divert that. Of the diversions that we were able to, is 85% of the ones didn't have to go back to 911 to send an officer. Very, very promising. We're hoping to go that 24/7. And I know the organization NOAA brought up Cahoots. We've been talking about Cahoots and what they're doing in Eugene, and you know, the return on investment. It may cost a little bit on the front end, but what's it going to save the citizens on the back end? And I believe every community needs to design their own program, design what's best for them. In Austin, we have a great emergency medical services, which they have community health paramedics. Well, we're trying to pair a community health paramedic with a mental health provider. So next year, we can actually start sending those out on some of the additional calls that they identify for mental health. But ultimately, people don't say, I want to have a mental illness. And we owe it to them to provide them the best response and best care. And that's the reimagining piece. That's where we need to think outside the box.
Okay. Well, Assistant Chief Troy Gay, thank you very, very much. Chief of Staff for the Austin, Texas Police Department.
Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you, and good luck.
All right.
Good luck.